And so it feels like atheism as a movement is a response or a reaction to the horrible, terrible, misguided, destructive nature of what religion does.
I think you're exactly right. And let me add to that. I know you have something else to say there. But let me add to that.
It's a dialogue, it's not a monologue.
that it's also about the political power that specifically the Christian God gets in our government and in our lives. So atheists will tend to say, we'll use the word God because that's the language the vast majority of people in our country use.
Yes.
And so when I am railing against quote unquote God, that, trust me, I've had a lot of people sitting in that chair who disagree about who God is, but are telling me that they have a direct line to that God. Right. And then the very next person who sits down will say, I heard the show you did last week. That dude was completely wrong about God. Let me tell you God that I know. And let me ask you this. Have you ever heard somebody say, I know God completely disagrees with me on this, but here's my opinion. No. And if God always agrees with your imagination, do you think maybe they live in the same place? Maybe it's just a red flag, right? So that's sort of the pushback that I give. And you're right. The atheist movement as a whole is definitely a reaction to the religious right that spawned up in the 70s through the 90s of we are righteous, we have a direct line to God. We're going to start inserting in God we trust as the motto. We're going to put it in courtrooms. We're going to put it on money. And it became this. Of course, that started in the 50s, but with the Knights of Columbus getting access to our president and Eisenhower, and we're like, well, we don't want to be those communist Russians, so let's be the good Christian families. And we sort of put our Christian flags up and said we are a Christian nation, and that's how this whole
it's
thing
almost a theocracy a little bit in that regard. I mean,
it's trying to get that way. It seems sometimes anyway. And so for many of us, we see that having that negative impact on us and our families and our kids. My daughter comes home and goes, Dad, I can't do homework. Why? Because our homework was supposed to be calculate how long it takes to get to church. And then I have to go up to the school and go, my daughter's feeling singled out, and then she has to come home either. I'm like, well, where do I take my daughter and then pretend, and then she has to come back and say, well, I didn't go to church, I went to this. She's in kindergarten, she's in first grade, and you're making her do these things. So then we have to get involved, and then I hear another person say that. This happened in their school. And I go, well, I can help you. Oh, you know what? There's a law firm who deals with it. Freedom from Religion Foundation is an entire organization who has very talented attorneys who will go after someone who's doing something like that. And then you're like, wow, these people are spending so much time and energy on something they don't even believe in. No, it's something we do believe in. It's called equality. It's
freedom.
Called freedom. And look, you have
nonviolence.
The freedom of religion includes a freedom from religion.
Absolutely.
That we don't have to have it shoved down our throat.
Absolutely.
And so that's you're right. It has spawned that. And so then sometimes people who are spiritual, people who in your case, you hear us railing against quote unquote God, and you think we're talking about the entity that you acknowledge or believe in, or some deist version of a God who started things. That's the furthest thing from our conversation until these conversations happen, right? But the big conversation that happens globally, or specifically in the United States, is definitely the God of Islam, the God of Christianity, and how men, specifically men, use those religious doctrines to control societies, to control people, to justify things like slavery and genital mutilation and rape and subservient women and power and control and politics and money, you name it, controlling what you eat on Fridays, controlling what direction that animal is pointing when it's slaughtered. I mean, every aspect of this can be traced back to that
stuff.
So when you hear us arguing that, now you give me enough principles, enough attributes to this God, I can say, well, these 7 things run contradictory to the other 13 things you said about him. A married bachelor can exist. This thing is not only unlikely, it's impossible. Right? That's who we're talking about. You tell me there's a God and his name is Paul, and he wears a long necklace, and you give me enough things, I can be like, okay, you give me now 147 attributes, and the last 30 don't mix with each other. That's the one where it sounds dogmatic when we're like, there's no way this thing exists. But then you come along and say, there is something. No one's arguing against your something. We just say, show us evidence for it, Derek. Show us the evidence. And if you don't have it yet and you say, you'll see later, we high five, have a cup of coffee, and move on with our day. Because you're not trying to legislate my behavior based on a dogma that you have. Hey, be sure to like and subscribe and watch other videos on this channel. Also support me on Patreon so I can afford a new staff. Please.